Okay, in the last video, we had quite a lot of comments that were getting into the rank system, and you see this on a lot of League YouTube videos nowadays. So I wanted to, impart my experience having climbed from Bronze 3 to Masters over the last 10 years, having been in Winners Queue and Losers Queue and Smurf Queue and all of the like. And also following, all of the patch notes and the changes Riot's mentioned about how the rank systems worked over the last couple of years. And I just want to, dump information on you guys about how the rank system works, so that we can clear up some of these misconceptions and people can have the right idea about how the game works. Okay, so where to even begin? That's kind of a tough one. So essentially what we're going to go through is we're going to go through different types of accounts, right? And then we're going to get to, okay, these are things that can happen to you throughout your ranked journey and how they work. And so I think for most people, which is going to be most helpful, is you're like me, you're returning to the game on an account that was ranked in a previous season. So no Smurf account, no new account, nothing like that. You're just on an account that was ranked in a previous season. So a new account starts at 1200 ELO, and it's the same ELO system that chess uses, but Riot's added some additions to it and adjusted things over the years in order to make it fit better with the game. And so the things that mostly Riot's added on to try to achieve is, number one, they have to maintain queue times, because if you just let it work off of the ELO system and you didn't try to force matches together, what you would end up with is very, very long queue times for Iron players and very, very long queue times for Masters, Grandmaster, Challenger players. The tail ends of the distribution where there aren't a lot of players to match up would be really bad. Also at night, right, matchmaking would be very bad in off-peak hours, and also for certain roles, since we have role queue, it would be very difficult to make those games to come together. And if people are waiting a half an hour for a game, they're not going to play as much. And so Riot needs to make sure that the queue times are pretty fluid, especially as a very big and popular game. Queue times shouldn't take really for an average ELO game more than 3 minutes or something like that. And so Riot needs to make sure that that's the case. Otherwise, people are going to get off. And I would imagine that for a lot of gold and silver players or more casual players, if queue times were like 10 minutes or something like that, a lot of them would play a lot less, or like would think something was wrong and get out of queue. I think it's a little bit more acceptable to have higher queue times in higher ELO, and Riot's maybe pulled the trigger too far the other direction. So it used to be the case that we would see streamers like Doublelift sit in queue for like a half an hour or an hour at night sometimes. And now master queue times are like really, really short. It's like 3 or 4 minutes to queue into a Masters game. That's a little bit too far the other direction, right? Because in order to force a Masters game to match in like 3 or 4 minutes, you're going to have like an autofill player like almost every game, which is pretty bad for competitive integrity at the rank where competitive integrity and matchmaking integrity needs to be the best. And so I would argue that like Masters plus players we're willing to wait like 10 minutes for a good game. So I think that the balance there is we don't want to wait a half an hour, we don't want to wait an hour where we're in queue more than we are playing the game, but waiting like 10 minutes to get into a game with like much less autofilled players, I think is something that master players are willing to do, but I don't think it's something that like gold players are willing to do. That's just the reality of it. Some gold players, of course, would love to have 10-minute queues and have no autofills, but the reality is that would not fly for like the game's play rate amongst like most players in a casual rank, right? So Riot has to balance, if we waited an infinite amount of time, we could find like the closest, most perfectly matched games, but we have a time constraint. We have to queue games and match games in a reasonable amount of time. So that's the struggle that Riot, has talked about openly, balancing back and forth between longer or shorter queue times for higher match quality. The other thing that they have to deal with, especially in that lower ELO, is Smurf accounts. And they don't want silver and gold players' games to be ruined and interfered with by players who are just trying to get another account to high ELO or something like that, or to practice other champions or another role on. And so that becomes very difficult because you have a lot of Smurf accounts going into silver and gold, and influencing games. And so Riot's implemented some changes, especially in the last couple of years, to prevent that from happening as much. And so we'll talk about some of those things. So you have this 1200 elo that you normally start with on a fresh account, but we're talking about right now returning accounts. So returning accounts are going to have a different elo. If you're above 1200, which is about silver 4 equivalent in face rank, you might have a 2000 elo account, or you might have a lower one that's like 1000 elo. And what happens is that for the past 10 years, or for the first 10 years of the game, the way that it would work is you'd have one reset at the start of the season, and it would take that 2000 elo account and average it with the 1200 default or average elo. And it would average them, and it would get like, okay, between 1200 and 1200, you'd get 3200, which divided by 2 is 1600. So you'd fall from 2000 to 1600, and that would be where you would start at the beginning of the rank season. That's why your rank would pull back a little bit at the beginning of the season, and then you'd have to prove that you, to the MMR system and the ELO system, that like you can still win 50% of your games at the rank you were previously at. And then if you do that, your ELO will climb back from 1600 to 2000. You'll prove that you can climb back to where you were. It's essentially an attempt to like rein in boosted accounts and bot accounts and stuff like that. And so it's good that it forces players to prove consistently year after year that they have to do that. We've moved into a system now where in season 13 we had 2 resets, but they were softer than that. So they were soft resets. And so, for example, maybe because there were 2 resets, rather than taking 2000 elo and averaging it with 1200 elo and getting 1600, since that was a 400 elo drop, maybe half of that occurred in the first split, half of it occurred in the second split. So maybe you went from 2000 to 1800, and from 2000 to 1800 again in the second split. So a little bit of a softer reset, a little bit easier to climb back, but because you wouldn't want people to be stuck climbing the entire split and not be able to get higher. But that's basically the way that works. If you were a lower ranked account, like in iron or bronze or something like that, below silver 4, you would actually you might have thought that this averaging effect would actually pull you up, which is true. So actually, a lot of players who are stuck in iron or bronze or something like that, who maybe in some cases even think that if they were a little bit higher elo, they'd be able to, kind of claw their way out, because it's very tough to win at a rank where everyone's so inconsistent and bad. The reality is that actually at the start of every split, you do get a little bit of boost to your elo to see if you really are bad enough to fall back down again. And so that's the reality of the situation there. Now, once you start getting into ranked after those placements, your first few games are going to be more impactful than your next set of games. So your placement games, which are your first 5 games now, used to be 10, right? But your first 5 games are much more impactful than your next 5, and then compared to your next 5 and your next 5 and your next 5. So that's why really accounts are still kind of fresh. I mean, it gets less and less fresh. After about 300 games, an account is pretty solidified in the rank that it's at. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't still climb with that account. For example, as I've said, with my main account here that I'm Masters on, and this is my highest rank account, and the account that I peaked on, this is the same account I've been playing on forever, and I've never had a Smurf higher than like D3 or something like that on another account. I've had a season where I demoted out of D4 and into Plat 1 when it was like you had to lose like 20 games in D4 to demote to Plat 7 times. I've had a season where I demoted from Masters to D4 like 3 times in a season or something like that. And I've still always managed to eventually, if you play enough games, climb your way back to whatever rank you were peaked at to be able to climb to a new peak. So this isn't to say that after you've played 300 games on an account that your rank is set in stone and that you can't climb if you were to improve. If you improve and suddenly start winning 60% of your games, you're going to quickly climb to the next rank. It's just if you're actually able to consistently be able to do that. you can fall really far and your MMR can be really doomed. But if you play enough games and win enough, you will fix it and keep climbing. In some cases, it is true that if your account's really doomed, and you'll see high elo players talk about this all the time on stream, it is the case that sometimes it could actually be faster to make a new account and then climb back up to your peak than, through Smurf Queue and stuff like that, than to play all the games that it takes to fall down to where your MMR has you falling to, and then get to stable LP gains and losses, and then play hundreds of games to climb all the way back up. That's just the reality. That takes a lot of games to do, and so sometimes it could be faster to do on a Smurf. But that never means that an account is completely doomed or stuck. So when you get into ranked, you can have a lot of different things that can occur to you, but you're winning and losing, and you're gaining a certain amount of LP and you're losing a certain amount of LP, and sometimes you'll go on winning streaks and losing streaks. And so we have three factors that are essentially playing into these big winning streaks and losing streaks that people like to call winner's queue or loser's queue. And people are more hyper-focused on loser's queue than they are on winner's queue, but people feel like both are a thing. So why do these exist? Why does this feel like a thing? Well, the first factor is that if you play a lot of games, which you will if you're playing a ton of ranked and climbing up pretty high, the reality is that statistically, if you flip a coin 10 times, the chances that you will get heads 10 times in a row is about 1 in 1,000. So if you play 1,000 ranked games, you would expect to win, to go on a winning streak, and to go on a 10-game winning streak, and to go on a 10-game losing streak, once every 1,000 games. On top of that, you could go on a 10-game winning streak or losing streak because as a player, you're playing hot right now, or you're playing poorly right now because you're on tilt. And it's even more common for that to be the case in a negative way, right? Because it's kind of hard, actually, even if you're in the flow, right? Even if you're doing really well, to consistently win a bunch of games in a row. But on the other hand, it's very easy to have a negative effect on your games and to be completely off and to be super upset and tilted and be like typing to your teammates and distracted and playing bad. That's very easy to do. And so it's very easy to, it's basically, we're saying it's easier to ruin games, right, than it is to hard carry them. And we know that that's true, right? So it's just easy to, unfortunately, like get in a bad mindset and kind of grief a bunch of games in a row and end up losing a bunch of them in a row. And so that makes it more common because as people, we're not a coin that's perfectly 50-50 at our main rank. We're actually pretty streaky in general. And so sometimes we're going to, be playing like really, really well and consistently and climb to new heights. And sometimes we're going to be playing really tilted and like tank down to like way below where we should be if we were at our peak. And so the reality is that that's affecting it as well. And there is a piece of it, right, which is Riot's trying to move Smurfs quickly away from a certain elo, right? And so if you start winning a bunch, it is true that like the MMR system will think that you're potentially smurfing, that you should be in Smurfs Queue, that you should be in Winners Queue, that you should be like winning a lot of games and promoting. And it is also true the other way around, that you can get into a bad cycle where you're losing a lot of games and your MMR is really doomed, and the system's kind of saying, wow, this guy's MMR is crashing like crazy. Maybe this person's MMR should be much lower potentially than where they're at. And they test you against lower and lower people, right, against lower and lower MMRs as you're doing worse and as you're getting more tilted, and that can result in you sliding quite far. But then once you recover and you go to sleep and stuff like that, and you come back the next day, you climb back up again. There's also stuff like regression to the mean, which means that if you're winning if you're actually at the rank where you win about 50% of your games and you have a really hot day and you win 60 or 70% of your games, it's kind of likely that you come back the next week and you win 40% of your games, because you're actually the type of player who wins 50% of your games at this rank. And just because you were hot last week doesn't mean you're going to be that hot this week. If you were winning 70% of your games consistently in gold, you would be like, a diamond player or something like that, right? But you can't win 70% of your games consistently in gold because you're actually like maybe barely better than a gold player. You're like actually a gold player or something like that. We talked about, so that's like the winning streaks and losing streaks and the three things that are contributing to that. We talked about, your LP gains and losses. That confuses people, right? So remember, we said the starting account could have like 1200 elo, but you also have a face rank, which in that case would be around silver 4 or something like that. Well, imagine your elo is 1200, but your face rank is the equivalent to like 1400. So your face rank's higher than your elo. Well, that's a problem because actually and there are reasons why that can be the case, through Riot increasing LP gains, right? And through people complaining about having negative LP gains, Riot has, balanced that out a little bit and stuff like that. So through these increased LP gains and trying to get rid of negative LP gains and getting rid of promotional series, which required you to win more elo behind the scenes before your face rank could go up, allowing LP to carry over from one division to the next. So before you would get 99 LP and then you go into your promotional series, and then you promote and you'd have 1 LP in the next division. Whereas now you would, go from 99 to like 22 or 21 LP in the next rank. Your LP, if you gain 22 or 23, your LP would carry over to the next division. So you get like an extra 22 or 23 LP in face rank that you wouldn't have before. All of these things have contributed to LP inflation and players essentially having a higher face rank or LP than their elo. And that's going to result in negative LP gains and losses, which people really hate because it feels like even if they're winning 50%, they're being punished and going down in rank, and that doesn't make a lot of intuitive sense. But the way to think about it is that you're actually winning 50% of your games. So let's say you're a gold 4 player, but you have silver 4 MMR. You're winning 50% of your games in silver 4, right? You're winning 50% of your games at 1200 elo. And so your rank should go to 1200 elo, should go to where you're winning 50% of your games, and you're going to demote from gold 4 to silver 4. Now, if your MMR was in that situation and you wanted to prove to the system that you should win, that you deserve to be gold 4 because you win 50% of your games in gold 4, you're going to have to win more than 50% of your games in silver 4. And then that'll fall off. And when you get to gold 4 games, then you have to win 50% of your games in gold 4 games. And then it'll fix itself over time. But, that's the reality of the situation, is that people demanding that Riot get rid of things like promotional series and demanding that LP gains be higher and stuff like that, and demanding that they never enter a state of negative LP gains, have all contributed to LP inflation, which is causing your face rank to be inconsistent with your elo behind the scenes. And that can actually cause more negative LP gains, which Riot's, trying to work on getting rid of. But that's just the situation. On the other hand, people don't acknowledge it the other way around. When you're gaining more LP than you're losing, which people seem to like as the default, when you're gaining more LP than you're losing, it's because you could be 1200 elo, but your face rank is like 1,000 or something like that. And so you could be a bronze player but have silver 4 MMR, in which case you're going to gain like plus 25 and lose 22. And so even if you're winning 50%, you're going to climb. And the reason for that is because, again, you're winning 50% in silver 4. So you're proving to the system that you should be a silver 4 player, not a bronze player like your face rank currently says. And so you'll move to silver 4. There's nothing wrong with any of this. Of course, you can correct this through other things too, like, if you dodge, that will decrease your face rank, and so your LP gains will feel nicer, but it doesn't really change anything or the amount of time it takes to climb, right? Because you're just gaining the LP back that you would have lost from dodging. You're just gaining it back through gaining more LP than you lose. So it doesn't really change anything. Also, for example, like if you lose a game at 0 LP, or, you lose a game at 1 LP or something like that, obviously those things are going to hurt your face rank to elo ratio, or whatever you want to call it. That's just how it works. Let's see. So we kind of talk about Smurf Queue. Basically, the idea behind Smurf Queue is that Riot, just like it has to match games quickly while keeping queue times consistent, Riot needs to make sure that Smurfs aren't ruining games for like silver and gold players, and so, or players at any rank really. And so it tries to create a Smurfs queue where we have Smurfs playing against other Smurfs, and we don't know what rank all these Smurfs are, but we can kind of figure out, like, okay, this guy is like the best Smurf out of these 100 people in Smurfs queue because he's winning, 90% of his games. And then this guy is winning like 60% of his games. So maybe he's more like a platinum player who's like barely better than most of the people here. And like this guy is not winning at all in Smurfs queue. He's winning 30 or 40%, and we drop him out of Smurfs queue, assuming that he's actually like a gold player. And then if he starts performing really well because he is actually a Smurf, back into Smurfs queue. And if he's not performing really well because he's actually a gold player, he stays in gold until he starts winning more than 50% of his games versus the gold players. It's actually quite a good system because it just means that gold and silver players are having to play versus less and less Smurfs. Another thing that's a piece of this is moving away from talking about accounts that had been placed in a previous season, is if you come in with a fresh account, you would get 1200 elo to start out with and then move up or down like we talked about. But Riot recently introduced a thing like 2 or 3 years ago where your normal game MMR would affect your ranked MMR. So not everyone starts at 1200 elo anymore, which is actually a good thing, and I'll explain why. It sounds a little bit unfair when you hear it at first, but it's really a good thing. This means that if you're a Smurf, you're going to have like 13, 14, 1500 elo, or maybe even higher when you start. So you're going to play many less games versus silver and gold players because you're already going to be slightly past them in rank. And then it also is, you're able to easily identify these people who are coming in with a very high MMR to begin with as people who are going in Smurfs queue and maybe immediately not even playing against real gold players. And so these things are actually contributing to Riot getting better at immediately moving Smurfs to the ranks that they need to get off to by quickly accelerating them. And that has some negative drawbacks, right? For example, I experience all the time in high diamond games, players who are in like D4 on a 70% or 80% win rate account, who are on like a fresh account, and some of these players are really good and they're on their way to Challenger, and some of them are really bad because they're like D4 peaked players who are now being thrown kind of slingshot into a Masters lobby, and then they do really bad because they're actually like a D4 player, and then what I'm experiencing is them getting pulled out of Smurfs queue, like them getting pulled out of this like accelerated queue and going back to where they belong, which is about D4. You may be able to accelerate or slingshot yourself a little bit higher than where you deserve, but the ultimate reality is that if you go higher than you deserve, you won't be able to win 50% of your games there, and then you'll demote back down to wherever you ought to be or whatever. So you might slingshot yourself into master elo games that you never would have gotten into on your main if you're a D4 player, but you're not going to stay there, right? You're just going to end up, in like D3 and then demoting to D4 or like in D4. So there's nothing wrong with it, and that's why I think people have complained less and less about it in high elo over the years, and and that sort of thing. And then if you're a new player, right, the opposite effect occurs. So you play your normal games and you don't do that well because you're actually new, and most people playing these normal games and leveling accounts are actually Smurfs or whatever. You play these normal games and then you start out, instead of starting at 1200 elo, you start at 1000 or 1100. And that sounds like it kind of sucks, right? Because you don't really want to start out lower than you could. And so it kind of sounds like, well, maybe I should avoid playing normal games, but you shouldn't. You want to place at a rank where you're going to win 50% of your games. And you want the MMR system to be able to easily identify where you should go. I'll, tell a quick story about how years and years and years ago, when I first got placed in Bronze 3, a friend of mine who was probably about the same, ended up getting placed into like Silver 3 or Silver 4, mostly because he had duoed and done extremely well in his placements, like 10-0 or 9-1 or something like that, with a friend who was kind of good at the game. And what ended up happening to him is his first 20 or 30 ranked games, he went something like 3-19, and ended up having such a miserable experience because he got placed much higher than he should have been, that he ended up just quitting the game and not continuing to try to get better or climb, because why would you want to play a game where you're barely ever winning? And so these kinds of things are actually totally fine. So if it means you start in bronze, it means you start in bronze, but you're starting at a rank where you can win 50% of your games much more accurately now, and so props to Riot for that. And then eventually you'll get slightly better and you'll climb and stuff like that. Okay, so now that we understand how that sort of thing is working, the LP gains and losses, the elo behind the scenes versus your face rank, and the way that different accounts can kind of come into rank and climb, let's talk about like some common misconceptions that we saw. It's like, does Riot balance games to keep players at a 50% win rate? This is kind of an interesting misconception because it sort of sounds true, but it's the person's getting at the wrong idea, right? Which is, Riot is, and their MMR system is attempting to place you into a rank or an elo where you win 50% and lose 50% of your games. Because that is the rank where you deserve to be. If it put you in a rank where you were winning 60% of your games and losing 40%, you just keep climbing to a higher rank. And so actually it wouldn't be putting you there at all. You'd be continuing to climb. The system would automatically keep you going. If they put you in a rank where you were, like my friend, losing all of your games, you would have a miserable time and never want to play the game. And so the system is trying to find a rank wherever that rank is for you. For some people it's in bronze, for some people it's in masters, where you're able to win 50% of your games, and then it gets you to that rank as quickly as possible, and then we go from there. And if you make improvements and you start winning more than 50% there, and you're able to consistently win more than 50% there, then you'll climb. But the reality is that, like, us as players, we're just not that consistent. So sometimes we may be able to peak a little bit higher, and other times we might completely grief our games because we're tilted out of our minds and like demote a couple of divisions. In my experience, like I've talked about demoting from D4 to Plat 4 and from Masters to D4, there's about a whole rank before you just get to a rank where the players you're playing against are so much worse than you mechanically that even if you're super tilted and emotional, like, you just, blow them out of the water. There's about a rank of variance, which for an individual player, if they're playing bad, which is really big, right? Because the difference between like D4 and Masters is pretty massive. So for me to be able to, if I'm playing really tilted, to play at a D4 level that's pretty bad. But it happens. And so you just have to go down and then go up and then go down and go up. So this person was also saying, as part of that they were thinking that Riot was trying to like force a gold 1 player or gold player or something like that to win 50%. So like if you're in gold 1 and you're winning 70% of your games, they come back the next week and you win 40% of your games because Riot's putting you in worse matches to keep you at gold 1. Riot doesn't really care if you're in gold 1 and enjoying your time or in Plat 4 enjoying your time. They just want you to like slightly improve over time so that you feel like you're not wasting your time and things aren't stagnant too much. And they don't want you to be at a rank where you're so bad that you're never able to win. And they don't want you to be not challenged at all by the game, because this creates an entertaining product where you're more likely to buy skins and stuff like that. And so actually Riot wants you to climb a little bit. They don't want you to be stuck in gold 1 forever, nor would that make any sense, because if you were actually legitimately in a position where you were able to win 70% of your games in gold like a Smurf, I do that on Smurfs, right? And then it's like, you're telling me, well, Riot will hit you with games where you can only win 40%. But that's not really the case, because then no one would ever be able to climb out of whatever division they start in. So obviously you're able to climb, which I guess could lead into the next argument, which is like, oh, I can't carry out of a rank if you're only slightly better than that rank. So like for you, yeah, sure, you could keep winning 70% consistently, but that's not going to happen for me because I'm actually like only one division better than my rank is. Well, that's the reality, is that the rank system is not hyper accurate to the division. Like I just said, players at any given point in time are going to be within a rank of their peak, because there's actually quite a lot of variance depending on how the player is playing. And so if you're off by one division, the rank system's doing a pretty damn good job of placing you where you belong. And the reality is that actually, if that's the case, you're probably not talking about winning 50% of your games. You're probably talking about you're capable of winning 51, 52, 53% of your games. Well, the reality is that if you're winning 52 games and losing 48 games for every 100 games that you play, you're going to have to play 100, 200 games to go up a division if you were playing perfectly consistently and not going on these huge losing streaks and winning streaks and stuff like that. And so the reality is that most people aren't playing enough games to see the exact perfect consistency that you would see on a huge sample size where they're playing really consistent, where they go exactly up one division that they deserve to go or something like that, or that they might be capable of going up. So, that's my response to that argument, I guess. And then okay, why are iron players matching into your gold games or something like that? Like I said, at the tail ends of the distribution, like Masters, Grandmasters, Challenger, and on the other end of that, even Iron, there are very few players in Iron. And so the players that are in Iron are actually often matching into Bronze and Silver games and stuff like that. Gold's a little bit unfortunate. Riot's talked about this openly, that they're trying to make sure that people's face ranks line up a little bit better when people are getting matched. But again, you're not getting matched off of your face rank. You should be getting matched off of your elo, which brings me to my point, which is what's going on with the actual elo of this game here. The matches are always matched so that one team is within 20 elo average of the other team. That's just always the case. The reality is that games where people get blown out and think that the teams are really unbalanced are usually actually just because one person was auto-filled or, and Riot's got some work to do with that, let's be honest, right? There are games where the autofill is not quite fair, of the number of auto-filled people on one team versus the other, but they've talked about this publicly. They're working on some of these things. They're just trying to figure out how to balance this with making the queue times reasonable for people. And so that's the cost of being able to quickly find a game, is that sometimes the matchmaking is not perfect, but it's a small fraction of games. So if you chalk these, 30% of these games are unwinnable because of this matchmaking and auto-fixing or auto-filling for someone who's legitimately at the rank or near the rank that they're at, you still have a lot of opportunity there with the rest of the games that are being played. A lot of times the game just snowballs one way or the other because some plays happen one way or the other, and that's the way the cookie crumbles, even though the game was actually pretty fairly balanced. And not every game that's a landslide means that the game was completely unbalanced, because the game is pretty snowbally, right? So a couple of things can fall one way for one team at the beginning of the game, or a level 1 invade or something like that, and all of a sudden a pretty fair, balanced match looks pretty unbalanced to the casual league player. But yeah, so to get back to this iron player in a gold game example, right? This could be a iron player who actually has silver MMR, and they just started playing their ranked games this season and were silver last season or something like that. And this gold player could be someone who's gold 4 and has silver 4 MMR or something like that. And so it's actually totally possible that the iron player and the gold player have the same MMR. Now that's probably not the case, but even if they're not, right, let's say the iron player is just starting their ranked climb and they have silver 4 MMR or something like that because they just played their placements and they were actually silver 4 last season, and the gold player is 50 or 100 games deep, and they were silver last season, but they've peaked a little bit too hard, and now they're probably actually on their way to demoting back into silver, and so they have silver 1 MMR. These, is it really that unreasonable that a silver 1 elo player matches with a silver 4 elo player? It's not really that unreasonable. Plus, you've got stuff to consider, are we playing during off-peak hours? Is this game occurring at 3 in the morning? Is the iron player queuing for a role that's not very popular, support or something like that? Is it at a tail end of the distribution? Yes. So there's not very many iron players, and the iron players that there aren't playing that many games. At least in Masters Plus, there aren't that many players, but they're all playing a ton. In Iron, it's even worse because there aren't that many players, and they aren't playing very much either. So you got all those things contributing to why an iron player could end up in a gold game. And honestly, you don't want to force iron players to only play against iron players and gold players to only play against gold players. You want the matchmaking to be based on the elo because that's what's accurate, not not to be based off of. It would be actually unfair if it was based off of just the face rank, because again, like we just said, with somebody who's starting the ranked climb versus somebody who's 100 games deep, you want to be matched in an ideal world with 10 players who are on roll, who are winning 50% at the same rank, who are winning 50% of their games at the same rank. So in a Silver 4 game or something like that, you'd want those 10 on roll players who are all winning about 50% of their games in Silver 4. Well, it may be the case that the person who fits that bill is this Iron player who's got good MMR, who's winning 50% of their games at Silver, and the alternative would be putting in some Silver player who's winning 40% of their games in Silver 4 and has like Bronze MMR. Putting that person in the game would actually be less balanced and create a less fair matchmaking than putting that Iron player in. And so you don't want to and believe me, Riot is literally using face rank now, like they've said in the patch notes. Because people don't like this, they're using face rank to limit the amount of matchmaking that can happen. And that's literally resulting in that sort of thing happening, which is making the matchmaking, ironically, less balanced because people are complaining noisily about something they don't understand. Okay. The last thing I'll say is that there's this concept that gets brought up a lot to respond to these players who maybe have misconceptions about the rank system. The idea that, there's 5 people, random people on the other team who could be trolling or hinting or AFKing and stuff like that, and only 4 on your team if you're not doing those things. And this is true in those instances for like AFKing and stuff like that. And so actually over a large number of games, you'll climb because of people AFKing and inting and stuff like that, because it's more likely to be on the other team. However, the caveat there that often gets left out by people arguing that against like people who have the wrong misconceptions and they're in Silver and stuff like that, is that they leave out that you have to play a large number of games for that to be the case, right? And so if you play 1,000 games a season and you're a Diamond player, that's great. But if you're a Silver player and you're kind of casual and you play like 100 games a season or 200 games a season, a couple of AFKs falling the wrong way can really screw up your season and your night. And so I wouldn't go so hard on that point. Friend of mine, it's just said the other day he had 3 AFKs on his team one night and none on the other team. And that's just giga unlucky. It's just giga unlucky, and it happens, and it's super tilting, and it makes it pretty difficult for him to even win 50% of his games that night, because how are you going to do that? So that's just, that's the way that it is. Yes, it'll benefit you, but if you're only playing like 50 or 100 games a season, it could end up actually hurting you, and that could be the case. The other thing, though, is that, and people also never talk about this in defense of these Silver and Gold players, is Smurfs works the opposite, because you're not a Smurf, and you're not a Smurf. So there's 5 players on the other team who can be Smurfing against you, and 4 players on your team who could be Smurfing to help you. And that's a really big problem, actually. And this is why I think Riot's focused in on that one thing, is like, we really need to get Smurfs, into Smurf Queue and like into higher elo quicker and like out of these gold games and stuff like that. That's a big problem for maintaining competitive integrity in gold, if you're actually more likely to lose because of Smurfs existing in the game, especially as the game continues to get older and so many of the accounts that are in gold playing versus the fewer and fewer legitimately Silver or Gold players nowadays, or newer players, are more and more of these accounts are Smurfs that are people coming from high elo trying to learn a new role or a new champion, or wanting to get another account into high elo. So that is something to keep in mind as well. But Riot's done a great job with the normal game MMR and with Smurf Queue of getting Smurfs out of these ranks. I expect that there are other misconceptions that I don't really even think about, having already gone through this climb myself. So if you want to leave some disagreements or some comments about other misconceptions that I haven't really seen, I'd be interested to see those in the comments, and I'll probably respond to some of them, and I'm sure other people will as well, because this is always a heated topic. But I hope you guys learned something about how the rank system works, and I hope you guys have a great day in solo queue, and enjoy.